Hi everyone, welcome to today's Science versus Bullshit, which is actually going to be a little bit different. I'm going to do, once I make sure everything is working, which is, God, I think that was the smoothest time I've ever done it. It's going to go really well. Yeah, I'm going to do a few client questions that I've had, partly because I'm slightly behind with them and partly because I think they're really interesting and hopefully other people will too. And the other thing that has gone crazy today is the post that I did this morning on smaller portion sizes. And I think part of it's because of the way that the media has obviously made it clickbaity, because shock, it was the Daily Mail. But it's been interesting, some of the comments, and also interesting from like a business standpoint. A lot of the comments are like, as long as, so the claim is we should have options, or the suggestion is we should have options where there's portion sizes that are 25% smaller for smaller people, and the example given is women, right? So a lot of people are like kind of upset about the fact that the example is women. And then the next part is like, well, as long as they're cheaper. And this kind of is an interesting concept of like, if people expect it to be 25% cheaper, they're going to be very disappointed, because when you really think about the business model of like a restaurant or something, there's absolutely no way that they could possibly make something 25% cheaper. Like, it would just be unsustainable. And yeah, so we'll see what happens with that. I think it's quite a sensible suggestion. But some people like to be outraged, and I get, like, you probably didn't have to mention women, but I also think it's just quite an obvious statement. And for sure, not all women. Some women need more calories, some women are bigger, some small men are bigger, some big women are bigger than small men, etc., right? It's not so much about the gender or the sex, which is a whole other conversation which I won't get into. But it's not really much about like being a man or a woman. It's just like being a smaller person, having lower energy expenditure, and thus it being useful actually to have portion sizes that are aligned with that. And I also understand the pushback of like, well, we should have choice to eat as much as we want or don't want. And I absolutely agree. They're not going to push, they're not going to be like, oh, you're a woman, you have to have this portion size. But equally, you have to understand that most people will eat the portion that they're given. And that's generally what we've been taught to do. And that's generally what you're driven to do. Whereas if there's a smaller portion, the likelihood is you will just eat a smaller portion, right? This kind of comes back to the argument that one of the easiest ways to lose fat is to look at the environment that you're living in and look at the portion sizes that you're having, as opposed to just trying to like white knuckle it. Like, actually, if you could create an environment that aligns more with the outcome that you want, then you're likely to get better results. Anyway, I'm going to go on to today's questions because I actually have many that I want to get through, and we'll see how many I actually get through, but I have quite high hopes of this, right? So the first one is, I've seen a lot of people talk about the anti-inflammatory diets. For example, Sophie Richards. Are these a thing? So yes and no. Mostly no, there isn't some magic anti-inflammatory diet. What there is a certain way of eating that is associated with lower levels of chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation is linked to a whole host of metabolic diseases and is something that you do generally want to avoid. But the way that you would eat in order to reduce your inflammation is very much like how you would eat just for general health anyway, right? So it would be things like eating lots of different plants, like fruits and vegetables and legumes and nuts and seeds, and enough healthy fats like olive oil and things that have omega-3 in, like fish, for example. And you would probably have lower ultra-processed foods and definitely lower trans fats and reduce the amount of alcohol that you're consuming. So it would kind of be broadly a Mediterranean style diet. It's not a specific anti-inflammatory diet, but that's the diet that we have the most research on that would reduce your inflammation the most. Also things like exercising consistently. And like the biggest thing by an absolute country mile is not being overweight, because basically that is what's causing the inflammation. It's not so much specific food groups. It's when fat cells become stretched and they start to release things like cytokines and inflammatory markers. That's what's causing the chronic level of inflammation. And I think people get too fixated on specific foods. So you don't need to like cut out dairy or cut out gluten if you're not celiac, or buy like random detox supplements or anything. Actually, the main things are just, are you sleeping enough? Are you eating in line with your energy demands, which means you're going to stay in a healthy, lean body? Are you exercising consistently? Are you getting in enough fruit and veg? Are you getting in some healthy fats? Are you getting in enough protein? Like it's literally just the basics of healthy dieting or living a healthy life. And it's probably just a marketing, well, it is really just a bit of a marketing angle behind it, which a lot of these things are, you know, and sometimes I've not actually looked into this person's stuff, but sometimes the recommendations are actually broadly very good. They're kind of just making claims that like your body does anyway. Like you see this a lot with do this diet or exercise regime to increase insulin sensitivity. And it's like, okay, cool. Like any diet that's going to help you lose fat if you're overweight and going to encourage you to exercise consistently will increase insulin sensitivity. You don't need a specific diet for that. You will literally do it anyway. So that kind of stuff is just packaged up marketing hype. Next one. Despite broken sleep, I feel I am able to function normally and I feel okay/fine. But is this because you adapt to your new norm? How would you know if it's not serving you well? What can you look out for? And does this make sense? Yes, it does make sense. This is a brilliant question. So you can adapt to kind of feeling fine when you're underslept and feeling like that's maybe like your new normal. This often happens when you underfuel and overtrain as well. And I will say, I think I lived like that for years because you get habituated to how you feel, right? That becomes your normal. So when people are like, oh, how do you feel? You're like, yeah, fine. These are my normal energy levels. But if your normal energy levels are always quite low, you kind of forget how good you can feel. So this was when I was training like twice a day completely unnecessarily. And I'm pretty sure for years I was like, yeah, I have decent energy. Like there was nothing wrong with my performance. I felt pretty good, I guess. And then when I reduced that, and I remember it was quite significant because there was like a change in my life where I just couldn't train that much. So I think I cut my training volume like in half overnight, essentially. And it doesn't immediately happen. And I think this is why people kind of lull themselves into a false sense of security or like convince themselves that it's not so bad. So that might be with the sleep of like, I don't know, you try for a week going to bed earlier and it hasn't made that much difference yet. Then you're like, oh, it's fine. I actually do really well off only 5 hours sleep. But sometimes it takes a little bit longer. And I would say this is especially true if you're overtraining and underfueling. If you then start like eating a bit more and training a little bit less for a week, you're probably not going to really notice any difference. But if you do that for like a month or so, then you start to kind of see these like habitual energy levels increase. Yeah, so I don't know because I don't know exactly how much sleep you're getting. If you think that you're functioning really well off like 4 or 5 hours sleep, there are people that do, but they are very much the outliers. So you might be like, yeah, no, I think that is me. But I would probably test getting a little bit more if possible and seeing how you feel. Because I do think that, well, there's research behind this as well, but you do become like habituated to how you feel. And then that feels like you're normal. And actually you might be able to feel significantly better. So yeah, I would have a think about that. Okay, can I take creatine while breastfeeding? We get this question a lot, and the short answer is yes, probably it's going to be fine, but we don't have a huge amount of data on it. And that's simply because it's quite hard to study women during a very specific period of their life and get enough data on that. So there's not a huge amount of data on it. There's no mechanistic reason that it would be a negative. And just to kind of remind people, like creatine is a compound that your body makes anyway, and you will still get it from foods like meat and fish. It's just that if you wanted to saturate your creatine stores, it's going to be very hard to eat enough meat and fish, for example, to get in enough creatine to saturate those stores. That's why people supplement with it. There is a little bit of research, and it shows that, if anything, there's a protective effect of creatine on the fetus, which would potentially be a good thing. But saying that, there's no like distinct guidelines on this because there's just not a lot of research on it. So if you're worried about it, I'd be thinking, what are the pros and cons to this? Like, if you're genuinely concerned about taking it, I just wouldn't. I don't think there's like a big enough rationale that there's going to be a huge benefit. Would I take it if I was pregnant? Yeah, I probably would, because I think I've also seen research. I'd need to go back and look at this. But like the child's brain development is slightly better. It might be because there's like more oxygen delivery or optimized oxygen delivery. But I do imagine that it would be minimal. So I would think about the pros and cons to you. I would speak to your doctor about it and let them know if you are taking it, because the other thing that you want your doctor to know is that if they are doing your blood work, there might be higher creatinine levels in your blood, and then they might think there's an issue with your kidneys, but there's not. You're just supplementing with creatine. So speak to your doctor first, but generally there's no real reason that it wouldn't be okay. I just, to cover my own back, don't want to blanket recommend that, based on the fact we don't actually have any research to prove, or enough research to prove, that it's like safe and effective in pregnant women. But there's no real reason that it wouldn't be. Do with that information what you will. Why do some people say staying in a calorie deficit too long becomes your maintenance? Great question. Because they're explaining something that does happen, just in a slightly misleading way. So what does happen is that if you diet and you successfully diet and you lose weight, you become a smaller person. So to then maintain your new smaller frame or smaller body mass, you will need less calories. And this is less calories to maintain your body mass, but also less calories for any given movement, right? So if you compare even like walking up a flight of stairs when you're carrying 50 pounds of extra weight compared to walking up a flight of stairs when you're 50 pounds lighter, obviously you're going to burn less calories when you're 50 pounds lighter, right? So some of this is completely normal and inevitable and meant to happen. And I would term that metabolic adaptation. The second part of this is that most people, and there's really interesting research on this, but it's quite old now, and I'd quite like to see the research of people that are wearing like things that measure their activity levels, because what tends to happen is when people reduce their calories, they also subconsciously reduce their expenditure. When we had less data on this, it was actually quite common for people to start eating less, but then adjust their calories or adjust their expenditure in a way that they spent so much less calories that they weren't actually in a deficit, or they were in a much, much smaller deficit than would be predicted. I would imagine that happens less now because you can track your steps. So what used to happen is subconsciously you'd like just start moving less, but you wouldn't really notice. But now that everyone has step counts on their phone or on their watches, it's much easier to track if that is happening or not. On top of that, there is more, I guess, like spontaneous movement, like fidgeting or like moving your hands around when you speak, like I do all the time. That tends to reduce as well, as your body's kind of trying to preserve energy. So there's two ways that your body responds to a calorie deficit, one of them being like increasing hunger and one of them being reducing energy expenditure. And generally, people who find fat loss harder are people who respond more strongly to a calorie deficit. So they defend their energy stores more strongly. So when you do reduce their calories, they actually do find that they move less without even thinking about it. It's not that they're being lazy, it's just that that's how their body responds. And there are some people where when you reduce their calories, their hunger ramps up to a much stronger extent than other people. So it's not as easy for everyone to lose weight. And there are genetic components to this as well. But back to the question, which was, why do some people say staying in a calorie deficit too long becomes maintenance? it's not that your body just shuts down and goes into starvation mode, which again, a lot of is kind of claimed on the internet. If you stay in a deficit too long, that deficit just becomes maintenance and your body has nowhere to go, that kind of thing. Or when people say, if you drop your calories too low, then you leave yourself nowhere to go when you plateau. Right, but you won't plateau. If you genuinely, like, let's assume you're a robot and you do genuinely stick to the lower calories and it's not an adherence problem, then you'd actually just achieve the weight that you wanted to achieve because you'd still be in a deficit, and then you could bring your calories up to maintenance. The reason that dropping your calories too low doesn't work is completely an adherence problem, not because you'll suddenly adapt so that despite the fact you're still overweight, 1,200 calories is now your maintenance needs. It might feel like that, but that's not actually what's happening. So starvation mode in that sense is not a thing. It's not that your maintenance will shift in that sense. I guess a good analogy for this is if you start with like a big house, for example, you start with a big house and you need to heat the whole house, you will need a higher heating bill, or you will have a higher heating bill. And then if you move into a smaller house, i.e. a smaller body, you will need less heat and your heating bill will be reduced. And your heating bill is your calorie expenditure, right? So you need less heat. It's actually quite a good analogy because so much of calorie expenditure is heat production. But anyway, hopefully that kind of helps people figure that one out. Generally, the metabolic adaptation is small if you're not losing very much weight. Like if you're someone who's got like 5 to 10 pounds to lose, there's not going to be a huge difference. If you're someone who's losing like 50 pounds, there might actually be quite a significant difference in your maintenance needs. Okay. I joined Commit to 6 this time last year, and I just want to say for me that it has not been a quick fix, mainly working on my relationship with food, but it has absolutely been worth it. And I am in such a better position now. I'm so much more compassionate towards myself and I more easily see the bigger picture. It's not a question, just to say, hang in there, it's worth it. Oh, that's nice. Okay, how strong is the evidence for SAD lamps? So I looked this up. It's actually pretty decent. I kind of thought that it wouldn't be, but yeah, there's some pretty decent research on SAD lamps. By the way, that's seasonal affective disorder and lamps, basically to, I guess, trick your body into thinking that there's more sunlight. So you do need an actual SAD lamp that is bright enough. And the protocols that I looked up are mostly like 20 to 30 minutes. They're mostly in the morning, so you're setting your circadian rhythm. And obviously it's best to do in the winter or I guess early autumn. There is some decent research that it's better than placebo, and then there's some comparisons to antidepressants in terms of effect size, and actually some of them are quite similar. Now, I would suggest that this would only be effective if the depression is due to seasonal affective disorder, obviously. So bear that in mind. But you need to make sure that the light is bright enough. You need to make sure that you use it at the right time of day. And yeah, I think that was basically it. But I think they're definitely worth trying. Like, as everyone here will probably know, I would absolutely tell you if I thought it was a waste of money. I think this is one thing I'd be like, yeah, I think it's worth trying. This is a really interesting question. And let me get it up. Oh my God. Right, so now I can see why not many people are watching on Substack, because apparently you have to verify your age now with your passport. Okay, well, we won't be doing that. I'll make sure I put this up on the podcast afterwards. Okay, here's the question. I feel frustrated about more and more coaches and fitness people I follow going on GLP-1 drugs and explaining why they are doing it. It's getting to the point where we keep getting told that they are helpful for all, and it's almost as if in some cases we would genuinely ask, then why wouldn't I just do them myself? Seeing as though they are so amazing. What are your thoughts? So I totally get this. I think there's a few things going on. I think for the right people, they are incredibly effective. They are life-changing. They have a huge positive impact on your life if you're someone who is obese or type 2 diabetic. But if you're not, and you're still, I guess, listening to that messaging, I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze. Is that the right saying? Like, honestly, I'm a little bit sick of it too. And I'm quite a pro for the right people, like GLP-1 drug use in the right context, with the right people, with the right support, with resistance training in the right dose. And I think one of the big problems that we're seeing more and more of, and probably will only become more common, is people who are taking them, not exercising, because they still see exercise as just a tool to lose weight, and they're able to lose weight without exercise, meaning that a large proportion of the weight that they're losing, because of the size of deficit that they can maintain, which most people can never maintain without drugs, means that they're losing a huge proportion of the total weight that they lose as muscle mass. And then if they do come off them, when they regain the weight, which most people do regain the weight if they come off them, that regain in weight isn't going to be muscle mass. It's going to be just fat, right? And then you're actually in a worse position than when you started. So it's so important that if you do use them, you use them in the right way. I would suggest microdosing them. So you're using them so that you can actually stick to a sensible calorie deficit, not that you slash your calories to the extent that is very common to have deficiencies in certain vitamins and minerals, or what was the other point I was about to make there? Oh, or just like your energy levels are so tanked that you can't exercise, or that you just don't think exercise is important because you're losing weight anyway. Like, these things are really important. Anyway, I do think that some people are using them. I don't know if I've seen that many coaches using them, but I guess that is a thing. If you're saying that it is, it said here that I'm sick of seeing coaches using them and then saying that they're good for everyone. I mean, I personally wouldn't want to. Like, I could quite easily get my hands on them, very easily if I wanted to. But I like eating, and I like being a little bit hungry, and I like enjoying food. And for people who don't need them, i.e., who can change with their habits with the right support, it's an unnecessary cost, and there are side effects. There are the potential to be like dependent on these medications. And I also think it's important to note, like, it's not so much of a shortcut as what people think. You still need to diet and exercise. You still need to eat well. You still need to get your steps in. You still need to sleep consistently. And if the goal is, to me, like my goal, and for most of my clients, it just, what is required changes. But like, the ultimate goal is normally to have optimal energy, live in a fit and healthy body, have a good relationship with food, and enjoy your life to the max. Like, broadly, that's the goal. You probably don't want to be taking, certainly not in the dosages that are prescribed at the moment, these medications, because you end up eating so little that actually your energy levels aren't particularly good. And yeah, it's just something to be aware of. But I would push back on the kind of being almost like envious of people that are taking them, because I do think that long term it's probably not a great thing, and you do still need to do all of the same things that you would be doing anyway. And I had a really good analogy for this the other day, and I don't know if I fully agree with it, so I don't know if I should say it yet, or will I say it just with the caveat of I've not actually worked through in my mind if I fully agree with this. No, I'm not going to say it. I won't say it. Maybe I'll say it at the end if my subconscious has allowed me to think through that. Okay. I basically have a social meal or event every other day for about a fortnight. My goal is not to put on any fat. What are your tips? You'll be absolutely fine. If you only have a social meal, Oh, okay, I read that wrong. Sorry, I thought you were saying I have a social meal every fortnight. Okay, now I get it. Okay, if you have a social meal every other day for about 2 weeks, that is going to be relatively hard to stay within your calorie range. I would estimate your maintenance needs, and I would be very aware of eating high volume, lower calorie type foods, ideally high protein, around the social meals that you're consuming. And then I'd really go into it with like a puck yes or no attitude. And this comes from an excellent article by Mark Manson, who is actually a dating expert. Well, that's what he started as anyway. Now he's written a few books and I guess has delved into other areas. But this article is about dating and it's called Fuck Yes or No. And it basically means, or like his theory behind it is like, if someone's not fuck yes, they're a no. So I apply that to food choices. So if something's not a fuck yes, it should be a no. And you should have high enough standards to be like, do you know what? That crappy Sainsbury's own mince pie isn't a fuck yes for me, but my mum's homemade mince pie, that is a fuck yes to me, right? And so you're making these choices, but it just means like you say yes to the things that you really want, but you probably say no to like the fifth roast potato, because actually by that point you're not getting as much enjoyment from that food. And I think another way to think about this is the law of diminishing returns and how that applies to your enjoyment of food. So I don't want like my clients to say no to the food that they really want around Christmas, but they might think about breaking it down. So like that first roast potato, like that's a fuck yes. Like that brings you so much enjoyment. It tastes incredible. You're really enjoying it, right? The second one is a fuck yes again. The third one, yeah, it's probably a fuck yes. And then at the fourth one, you might be like, I don't know if I'm actually quite full and I don't think I'm getting as much enjoyment from this fourth one as I did from the first one. That's kind of the law of diminishing returns, right? For the same amount of food, I'm not getting as much enjoyment. Okay, that's the time to stop, right? So then you still get to get the vast majority of the enjoyment and like enjoy the food that you are looking forward to at Christmas time, or you can apply this at any time of year, but without like breaking your calorie balance. Is it important for women to get, the other thing I would say as well is if you do have a social calendar like that this time of year, which I think is quite common, I would be looking at it like at the start of the week and being like, okay, how many meals is this? Where are they? You know, that one I'm not so fussed about drinking at. That one I really do want to have a few glasses of wine at. This one I'm really excited about the dessert, so maybe I'll have like a smaller main. Or this one I know that the food's not going to be that good, so I don't mind not eating as much at that one, you know, and you're going to make choices in line with that. Okay, is it important for women to get some food, specifically protein, in quite soon after waking up? From a keeping hormones balanced perspective, this is something I heard this week and I was interested in. In a word, no, but I think where this probably comes from, because there's always like a little bit of truth in these things, just usually completely misinterpreted, is you could claim that a high protein meal will help with satiety and maybe if you're type 2 diabetic, blood sugar control. There are some studies that show that if you front load your calories, i.e. you eat more in the morning compared to later on in the day, then you have better glycemic control. That could be a kind of claim to eat more in the morning, for example. Probably more important for someone who has poor glycemic control, i.e. someone who's insulin resistant or has type 2 diabetes, or potentially PCOS. There's some really interesting research on meal timing in PCOS as well. But there's not any strong evidence that you need to specifically eat protein within like X amount of time of waking up, especially not for hormone balance in otherwise healthy women. So I wouldn't over stress about that. What's much more important is the total protein that you're eating over the day, your overall pattern of eating, and that aligns with how you like to eat and what you can adhere to and what you're going to stick to long term and not feel restricted on, as opposed to worrying about like getting in protein within 30 minutes of waking up, for example. Okay, how to stick to your calorie deficit when you're constantly going over or being at the top end of your calories. Right, so it's a bit of a checklist I would go through here. I'd be thinking, do I need to reassess my calorie range? Like maybe it should be or could be slightly higher. Do I have enough structure? Because if every day you're like, oh, I keep going over, like, are you going into every day being like, well, hope I hit my calories today? Or are you like, okay, I didn't hit them yesterday. Why was that? Oh, I overate in the evening. Okay, well, why did you overeat in the evening? Maybe I didn't plan the start of my day well enough. Maybe I need to have a bigger breakfast or plan my lunch so that I'm not coming home absolutely starving and then just like overeating in the evening. Do you have some kind of structure? I would highly recommend that you follow the 3-to-1 structure because it's a nice balance between structure and pre-made decisions and then flexibility as well. And then I'd also look at your food choices because I think too many people focus on total calorie number and don't look enough at the food choices. As an example of this, I am willing to bet I could make a client more satiated on 1,600 calories than 1,800 calories simply by looking at the food choices that they're making so that you've got more protein, higher food volume. I mean, those are the kind of the key things, but I do have a guide for this. So if anyone is interested in it, just message me on Instagram after this, hunger, and I will send you my ultimate guide for hunger that I wrote that's based on the science and evidence that we have around the most satiating foods and the way to eat foods in order to make them more satiating. And then I'd also be thinking about like your environment and how you're setting yourself up. Like, is there a certain time of day when you're overeating? Is there a certain time of day when you're undereating that's causing the overeating? And I would go through those things. But I mean, the primary thing would be like, let's make sure that this is the right calorie range for you. And then we can see why you might be struggling to stick to that. Okay, if you are very overweight and always have been, what would your top 3 priorities be for losing weight? Okay, so from a very like physiological level, you need to be in a consistent calorie deficit. But what I'd be doing first is figuring out why you haven't been consistently sticking to that. And if that's because you have previously set your calories too low, I think a lot of people get stuck in their head of like 1,500 calories is a good target. And if you're someone who's very overweight, that's a huge deficit, right? If you're someone who's already quite lean and is like on the smaller side of their height and they're just a small woman who doesn't expend a huge amount of energy, then actually 1,500 calories might be a really good target for you. If you're like on the heavier side, then you might be in a massive deficit on that and then thinking that you're failing, but actually the calorie target is just not right for you. So making sure you're trying to stick to a sensible calorie target that you can stick to long term. And then if you are, for example, then I'd be figuring out kind of what we just went through, like, why are you overeating? What's going on? Is it hunger? Is it boredom? Is it your environment? Is it a combination of all of them? Are you a stress eater? Are you not sleeping well? So your hunger levels are ramped up? You know, what does that actually look like? Interestingly, activity levels have an impact as well on both sides. So this is really interesting. There is a link, and some of this is very individual, but there is a pattern between hunger and activity levels. And when someone actually has very low activity levels, their hunger tends to be dysregulated. When someone has like relatively moderate activity levels, their hunger is quite regulated to those activity levels. And when someone has very high energy levels, then actually hunger ramps up like too much, which is why we often see people who are doing things like training for marathons, for example, having very high hunger levels and that actually being very hard to manage their hunger. And people end up putting on weight despite exercising more and thinking, oh, I would probably lose weight in this scenario. The next thing I'd be thinking about is if you have a long way to go, it can feel really overwhelming. So I would break this down into milestones, right? I wouldn't be like, I need to lose 100 pounds. I'd be like, okay, can I lose the next 2 pounds? Okay, I think that's doable. Right, let's focus on that. And then from there, can we do another chunk? And focus on like small milestones as opposed to looking at how far you have to go, because that can feel really overwhelming and like, oh, I just want to give up. The next thing I'd probably focus on before exercise, and this really depends on what you mean by really overweight, but if you're very overweight, exercise can be really uncomfortable. So one of the best things you can do is focus on diet and walking to lose a bit of weight, and then start to slowly incorporate exercise as it feels more and more comfortable. But yeah, I think those would be like the first things I'd be focused on, and not overwhelm yourself, and don't try and do everything at the same time. Just focus on those things, and then the rest will kind of flow from that. Okay, how to structure the perfect 20 to 30 minute workout. This really depends on your program overall, obviously on your goals, how many times a week you're training. But if we just go, for argument's sake, with you want to do a full body workout in 20 minutes, I would pick 2 lower body movements, 2 upper body movements, and a core movement, or maybe even 2 core movements. And I'd probably do them as like a tri-set. So I might do like goblet squats, press ups, and lying leg raises, and I do them 3 times round. The reason that I'd set them up in a tri-set is because you only have 20 minutes and you want to get in as much volume as possible in 20 minutes. And if you're, for example, doing goblet squats and then you're going into, what did I say, press up or chest press, or an upper body movement, your legs can kind of recover while your upper body's working, right? So you need less total rest time. And I would just be doing like those 3 things 3 times round, and then move on to another tri-set and do that 3 times round. And then hopefully, if you have time, move on to another tri-set and do those 3 times round. And I'd be thinking about certain muscle groups, right? But if you even just think about push-pull legs in each tri-set, that would probably work quite well, or push-pull core, or yeah. But that might be an example of like, you could do lat pull with shoulder press and a lower body movement, like, I don't know, stiff leg deadlifts or something. And then part of your body's resting while the other part is working, and you can do it more like a circuit, get more done in less time, create more volume, get a better outcome, get out of the gym within 20 minutes. That's what I'd be thinking about. Okay, right, I'm going to do one more. Do you think fiber supplements are worth it? Sometimes, but rarely. I think it would be much better if you could get enough fiber from your diet. So there is research that shows that getting in enough fiber, so that's about 25 grams a day, will lower your risk of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, bowel cancer, and can help with like appetite, and some small impact on blood glucose control as well. If you can get that from fruit, veg, legumes, whole grains, that would be my preference for various reasons. By the way, top tip here, raspberries have a surprising amount of fiber in them, so that's a good way to get in some fiber. But one of the reasons that fiber is so beneficial is that the foods that you would need to eat to get in enough fiber also have their own benefits, like antioxidant content. So I would rather people got it from that than just taking a fiber supplement. Also, I think sometimes supplements lull people into this false sense of security that like, oh, it doesn't matter that my diet's shit because I take this fiber supplement, so I'm still getting in enough fiber. Like, you should be looking at the quality of your diet. Now, if you're doing that, or if for some reason, I'm trying to think of a reason that you couldn't, but like if for some reason you literally couldn't get in enough fiber from your diet, then yeah, supplements would be an option, but it's certainly not better than getting it in from your diet. And then I'd also just be careful of taking too much of the supplement too quickly, because that can cause quite a lot of gastrointestinal distress. So yeah, main focus as usual would be looking at your diet first, and then if you do need to supplement, you could supplement. All right, I hope this has been useful, and I'm sorry that I think there's an issue with Substack, but hopefully that will be rectified, and I will post this up on the podcast, and I will be back next week with more questions to answer. All right, bye.